In a world ruled by deception, one man vows to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. You think you can hide from me? For Detective Marlow, the hunt is personal. This city has no room for secrets. Why are you doing this? Because I know the truth, but as the walls close in, the hunter becomes the hunted. How far will I go to destroy myself? This January, truth has a price. Detective Vincent Marlow sat at his desk, a cigarette smouldering between his fingers, the curls of smoke dissipating into the air like ghosts, whispering secrets. His office was a cluttered mess of case files, coffee-stained notes, and evidence bags. The dim light from the solitary desk lamp cast shadows across his furrowed brow, revealing the deep lines carved by years of sleepless nights and burdensome cases. The precinct was quiet, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, and the occasional rustle of papers the only sounds. Marlo leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed but mind racing. He was a man defined by his intensity. His ice-blue eyes, sharp and calculating, were constantly scanning, dissecting, judging. Even in solitude, he remained on edge, as if the weight of unsolved cases pressed down on him like an invisible burden. He was regarded as one of the best detectives in the precinct, solving cases that left others scratching their heads. Yet beneath his polished reputation lurked an uncomfortable truth, a deep-seated prejudice that he wore like a hidden scar. It wasn't something he openly admitted, even to himself, but it was there, affecting how he viewed certain people, certain communities. He'd never voiced it, never let it show outright, but the decisions he made, the suspects he pursued, the leads he followed, they all bore its subtle mark. Marlowe's prejudice wasn't born of malice, but of pain, a festering wound that time had failed to heal. He exhaled a long plume of smoke, his mind wandering back to the case that had planted the seed of bias. It was nearly a decade ago, but the memory lingered like a shadow. A murder investigation gone horribly wrong, a suspect he believed to be guilty, only for the evidence to exonerate them. And the victim, someone close to him, too close. The betrayal of his own instincts had cut deep, leaving scars that refused to fade. The trauma had festered, morphing into a quiet but pervasive mistrust. He'd buried himself in work, using his sharp mind and relentless pursuit of justice to mask the cracks in his character. But the cracks were there, widening with each passing year. Marlowe's reverie was broken by the shrill ring of his desk phone. He stubbed out his cigarette and picked up the receiver, his voice gruff. "Detective Marlow." The voice on the other end was that of Captain Hughes, his superior. "Marlow, we've got a new case, a high-profile one. Come to my office." Marlowe's heart quickened, but his face remained stoic. High profile usually meant media attention, political pressure, and a minefield of potential missteps. He grabbed his coat, the worn leather creaking as he slipped it on, and headed for Hughes's office. As he walked, his mind raced through scenarios. Each step brought a mixture of anticipation and dread. He thrived on the challenge of complex cases, but hated the scrutiny they brought. The crime scene was a chaotic tapestry of flashing lights, uniformed officers, and murmuring bystanders. The victim was a young woman, her lifeless body discovered in an alley behind a popular nightclub. The cause of death, a single stab wound to the chest. Marlow stood at the perimeter, his gaze sweeping over the scene with practiced detachment. He noted the layout of the alley, the positioning of the body, the scattered evidence. Every detail mattered, no matter how small. He approached Officer Ramos, a rookie who'd been first on the scene. "What do we know?" Marlo asked, his tone brisk. Ramos shifted nervously. "Witnesses are saying they saw someone fleeing the scene. Descriptions vague. Male, medium build, wearing a hoodie. That's all we've got so far." Marlo nodded, his jaw tightening. Vague descriptions were a detective's nightmare. He stepped closer to the body, examining the victim's face. She looked no older than 25, her features frozen in an expression of terror. A discarded handbag lay nearby, its contents scattered. Marlo's sharp eyes picked out a lipstick. Marlo's inquiries led him to the nightclub where Claire had spent her final hours. The manager, a wiry man with shifty eyes, claimed to remember her. "Yeah, she was here last night. Came in with a couple of friends, but I think she left alone." "Did you notice anyone following her? Anyone acting suspicious?" Marlo pressed. The manager hesitated. "There was a guy, tall, ample receipt, and a student ID card. The name read Claire Dawson." As crime scene technicians snapped photos and collected evidence, Marlo's mind pieced together the victim's final moments. What had brought her to this alley? Who had followed her? And why? Back at the precinct, Marlo began piecing together the victim's life. Claire was a university student, studying art history. Her professors described her as bright, passionate, and driven. Friends painted a picture of a young woman full of life, with no known enemies. Yet someone had ended her life in a dark alley, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As he worked, a sense of unease crept over him. The details of the case were uncomfortably familiar, echoing the events that had haunted him for years. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. But the nagging suspicion that he was missing something crucial lingered, like a faint whisper in the back of his mind. Back at the precinct, tensions simmered. Marlo's colleagues respected his skills, but often clashed with his abrasive demeanor. Detective Parker, a younger officer with a reputation for challenging authority, was particularly vocal. "You're focusing on the wrong angle, Marlo," Parker said, leaning against his desk. "This isn't about some random guy stalking her. Look at her social circle. People close to her are more likely suspects." Marlo's eyes narrowed. "I've been doing this longer than you've been out of the academy, Parker. Don't tell me how to run an investigation." Parker didn't back down. "And maybe that's the problem. You're stuck in your ways, ignoring leads that don't fit your narrative." The room fell silent as the two detectives stared each other down. Captain Hughes stepped in, his tone sharp. "Enough. Both of you. We're here to solve a case, not settle personal grudges. Focus." Marlo returned to his desk, seething. Parker's words gnawed at him, stirring doubts he refused to acknowledge. Was he letting his biases cloud his judgment? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. He was a professional, and professionals didn't let emotions interfere with their work. Marlo's investigation led him to a man named Eric Cole, a bartender at the nightclub, and the last person seen speaking with Claire. Eric's record was clean, but his nervous demeanor during questioning raised red flags. "I didn't do anything," Eric insisted, his voice shaky. "I talked to her, yeah, but that's it. She left, and I stayed behind." Marlo didn't believe him. His instincts told him Eric was hiding something. Deciding to follow his hunch, Marlo began tailing the bartender after hours. He watched as Eric visited a rundown apartment, exchanged hurried words with a man in a leather jacket, and slipped into a back alley. Marlo followed at a distance, his pulse quickening. The alley was dark and silent, the kind of place where bad things happened. He saw Eric hand something to the man, cash perhaps, and receive a small package in return. A drug deal? Or something more sinister? Before Marlo could intervene, the men parted ways. Eric returned to his apartment, while the other man disappeared into the night. Marlo made a note to dig deeper into both men. Something about Eric's behavior didn't sit right, and Marlo was determined to uncover the truth. Marlo returned to his dimly lit office, the weight of the case pressing heavily on his shoulders. The room felt colder than usual, the silence oppressive as he replayed the night's events in his mind. Eric Cole's jittery demeanor, the cryptic exchange in the alley, and the haunting familiarity of Claire Dawson's murder all swirled together in a storm of suspicion and unease. He opened the file on his desk, his eyes scanning the details of Claire's life, her last moments pieced together through witness accounts and scattered evidence. A photograph of her smiling face stared back at him, a stark contrast to the grim reality of her death. Marlo felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Regret, perhaps, or a distant echo of guilt. For a moment, he wondered if his own biases were steering the investigation down the wrong path. But he quickly shoved the thought aside. The case had to be solved, and he would do whatever it took to find the truth. As he leaned back in his chair, the phone on his desk rang, shattering the silence. He hesitated before answering, the shrill sound a jarring intrusion into his brooding thoughts. "Marlo," he said, his voice gruff. The voice on the other end was low and measured. "Detective, I think you're looking in the wrong place." Marlo's grip on the receiver tightened. "Who is this?" The line went dead. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. The call could be a prank or a distraction, but it felt like something more. A deliberate move in a game he didn't yet understand. A faint chill crept up his spine as he realized the caller's words mirrored Parker's earlier criticism. Was someone else watching the investigation unfold, pulling strings from the shadows? Marlo turned his attention back to the file, flipping through pages as if the answers might leap out at him. The photograph of Claire caught his eye again, and he couldn't shake the feeling that her story was far from over. Somewhere in the tangled threads of her life and the secrets she'd taken to the grave lay the key to unraveling this case. Outside, the city hummed with life, oblivious to the dark undercurrents that ran beneath its surface. Marlo lit another cigarette, the glow of the lighter briefly illuminating his face. The case had just begun, and already it was pulling him into its depths, dredging up old wounds and testing the limits of his resolve. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of doubt, not in his abilities, but in the path he was taking. And in the shadows, something waited. Marlo could feel it, a presence, a threat, a truth he wasn't ready to face. But one way or another, it was coming for him.